We need the darkness. We need the hard times to teach us lessons. We need the darkness or we wouldn't understand the light. We need sorrow or we wouldn't understand joy. Okay, in the gospel according to Petra, I think that's nonsense.
I'm so glad you joined us today. That makes you a part of CSLDallas, and we love that our community continues to grow. And we also love to give great spiritual content. And a way that you can participate in our community is financially give to it. It's easy to do so. Go to CSLDallas.org and hit the give button. Or you can set up a text giving mechanism at 972-954-4404, a safe and secure way to send us money whenever you watch a great message like this. So thanks for giving, and buckle up, because here comes the spiritual content.
The winter solstice gives us the opportunity to engage in the topic of light and dark. Right? It's the darkest night of the year. We all know the story. It's the darkest night of the year. And of course, the winter solstice is where we received the inspiration from Northern Europe for our Christmas tree. It was originally a winter solstice tree. And the reason they brought in greenery and the red berries was to remind us that there is life in the middle of the dead of winter and under the snow and in the cold, just like we would say that behind the clouds the sun is still shining. And so this really ancient tradition is an opportunity to remember that in the middle of darkness, light is still shining. And the darkness, of course, is usually considered from this ancient tradition to be problematic. It feels as though the dark is swallowing up the light because the days are getting shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. And so darkness has been traditionally associated with, something not so great, right? Darkness is something to be avoided, gotten out of, and for God's sakes, could we please just bring the light into the room so that we don't have darkness? Now, I don't know how many of you used to go to the winter solstice that Amy Martin put on here. We used to have a huge winter solstice for 20 years, and CSLDallas was involved in it before Amy Martin shut it down. She was simply no longer able to continue to do it. And it was the largest winter solstice celebration in the United States for many, many years. As I said, we were privileged to be a part of it. And the thing that Amy did, and the reason that we were so excited about being a part of it, is that the thing that she did with the winter solstice, it was the only winter solstice celebration in the United States that didn't key around the light overcoming the darkness or the light being somehow birthed out of the darkness as something better. Actually, in every single winter solstice that we were a part of with her, there was always a 3 to 5 minute period right in the middle of the program of darkness. Just to be with it, to make friends with it, to discover its potency, to not be constantly in the heroic struggle of light over dark, but to actually explore the possibilities of light and dark. The ancient Hindus understood how critical light and dark are. They called this the pairs of opposites, that light and dark are fundamental to the expressed physical world and the human condition. We see it represented in the yin-yang symbol, right? Light and dark. And if we are unfamiliar with the symbol, it looks as though they are somehow trying to take each other over, right? But if you recall from the yin-yang symbol, that inside the black portion is a white dot, and inside the white portion is a black dot. And what the yin-yang symbol actually represents is that light is being birthed out of darkness, and darkness is being birthed out of light. And that it is actually the two of them together that make a wholeness. And so rather than thinking about light and dark as opposites, we often think of them as complementary. And what I hear in metaphysics a lot is, well, we wouldn't know what the light is if we didn't have dark. right? And light and dark is all about the contrast. We need the darkness. We need the hard times to teach us lessons. We need the darkness or we wouldn't understand the light. We need sorrow or we wouldn't understand joy. Okay, in the Gospel according to Petra, I think that's nonsense. I don't subscribe to that. I don't think that it's about. I don't think it's about that. I think that light and dark are more than just complements. They're certainly more than just opposites, and they're more than just complements. We don't have darkness so that we can experience light. I think there's something much more valuable going on. And I think it's an opportunity for us to explore the constant relationship with absolute spiritual truth, the light of the divine, the love of the divine, in the complex, paradoxical human experience, which seems to include a whole host of experiences, some of which we might call dark, and some of which we call light. We had an opportunity to really explore this a little bit as we went on our trip to New Zealand. We took the New Zealand trip because they did all the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit movies down there, some of my favorites, and actually I love the books a whole lot better than the movies. So we used the hero's journey as an opportunity to explore in our spiritual practice while we were in New Zealand. And one of the fundamental questions in the hero's journey is, or the fundamental quest is often for the light to be found in spite of the darkness, or for the darkness to be overcome. So one day while we were in New Zealand, as we were exploring the hero's journey, that day we had the opportunity to go into these caves. So we walked for quite a while on a metal boardwalk, a metal walk, if you will. We walked through the caves, a little bit of light here and there, lots of big rushing water. And they told us when we got to the end of that, we were to be completely silent. And we got into boats. And as we got into the boats, then the lights went off. And we floated on the river in pitch darkness into the caves. And they suggested that we keep our hands and feet inside the boat because these weren't like really large caves. This was a small passage that had been carved out by this water. We learned later that literally the guide was pulling us along on a rope, making sure that we weren't scraping the sides. What were we looking for? We were looking for glowworms. We were looking for glowworms. How many of you grew up with fireflies? Right? Cool, right? I remember catching them, putting them in the jar, and then being all sad that they died. And so I learned not to do that anymore and just to watch them out there. Well, these glowworms are the same principle. They glow at the end, and they're on the one hand attracting mates, but more importantly, if it's dark in the cave and you're the only thing glowing, where do you think the bugs go? They go to the light, absolutely. So it is a clever opportunity for them to capture their meals. A bunch of glowworms on the ceiling, they're called a constellation because that's what they look like. So as we entered the cave that morning, I had suggested to our group, your contemplation while you're in this cave is what's the difference between dark and evil? What's the difference between dark and evil? Wondering whether there actually is one and what it might be. And what we experienced as we went through this this time in the cave, and gosh, I don't know, we were there easily, what do you think, 45 minutes? We were floating in the cave, 45 minutes. Some of us were a little like, we're going to be in a cave, in a dark cave for 45 minutes. I mean, just tell you that there was no claustrophobia, it was breathtakingly amazing. And as we unpacked the experience, what was so amazing is how people talked about, first of all, how safe they felt. And that the dark can actually be nurturing and comforting. And what an amazing thing to be in that darkness, not be afraid, not worry about something jumping out at you in the dark, not worrying about what's going to happen next. To just be in the darkness. And we discovered in the conversation that dark and evil are actually not synonymous. But we have, in our culture and in the heroic journey, and in the whole press toward enlightenment, in the whole press towards going up to the divine, we have embraced this idea that the darkness has to be overcome. And we have equated, in many cases, dark and evil. And yet, one of the things that I always have found so astonishingly interesting is when you think about evil, the word evil itself, do you know what it is? It's simply the word live spelled backwards. I mean, think about that. I mean, I know that's maybe not true in other languages, but I think there's something deeply metaphorically true about the idea that evil is simply life being lived backwards. So when we began to explore the difference between dark and evil, the things that kept coming out is that evil, those things that we might think of as evil, really are only human-induced. There's nothing in nature that's evil, because we defined evil as malicious intent, or the intent to harm. Even the lion has no intent to harm. It has the intent to feed itself. Do you see the difference? There's no maliciousness in it. It's just life. And the ability to begin to take these two things apart and recognize that those things that we call evil might really only be those times and places where we as human beings seek to live life with our back to the light, with our back to truth, with our back to the spiritual reality. And that it really has nothing to do with the dark. What qualities might there be in the dark that we would want to embrace? Well, here we are at the Winter Solstice, the longest night of the year. What's happening in your garden right now, in your garden, with your trees, in your backyard right now, as it's cold and all the leaves have fallen off the trees, all the perennial flowers have died back. What's happening in your garden? Do you know? Rats. They're cleaning it up, absolutely. You can see the critters better. Life is being born. How so, right? Life is being born, but where? Underneath where we can't see it, right? The garden looks dead, the trees look dead, everything looks dead, but it's all doing that. It's all of that has died away so that the energy of life can grow the roots. The roots are being grown underground where we can't see it, in the nurturing, quiet, dark, under the soil. And what a profound opportunity it is to think about darkness, what we might see about darkness. So the other thing is that we talked about, when you have an intent to harm, you don't see that which you are harming as part of yourself. Because if it were a part of ourselves, we would not have an intent to harm. And when we have an intent to harm ourselves in some form or fashion, we understand that that's a pathology, right? When people are either doing harm with substance abuse or harm by cutting themselves, it's actually a pathology. And we seek to heal that. So if we're doing harm, whether it's harm to the environment, harm to people around us, harm to those that we say we love, harm in some other way, do you see, we don't actually see that they are part of ourselves. We don't actually see the oneness. We're not actually engaged in that experience of oneness, or we could not intend to harm. And in those caves, in that darkness, it was like the womb of oneness. It was like the womb of life itself. And then seeing these little flashes, these little moments of light, of life, was an extraordinary opportunity to differentiate that experience of knowing oneness, even if we're in the dark, of experiencing that oneness. So the other thing that came out of it, a couple days later, we went, we went to a little town that was sort of considered the equivalent of Santa Fe in New Zealand, and it was all about the light. All the artists come, and it's all about the light and how beautiful the light is. So of course that day we had to explore the light. And as we talked about it in our spiritual practice, one of the things that came out of the conversation about the light is a question: is the light always good? Well, sometimes it's a little harsh, isn't it? Sometimes the light feels like a glaring, harsh spotlight, puts you to the question: are you being spiritual? Did you do your meditation today? How's your spiritual life going? Right? Can be a little like, whoa. The light can be a little harsh. And to just blanketly say that it's always good, it was an interesting thing to just have that come up as part of the conversation. The light can certainly be harsh. It can be very unforgiving. I don't know about you, but I don't care for the lights in the ladies' dressing rooms. Pretty unforgiving, right? Pretty unforgiving. And that's why we like the soft light. We like the nice soft light, the candle light, the pretty light, and then we all look beautiful in it, don't we? Because the light can be both harsh and unforgiving. The light itself doesn't seem to me to be always kind. The light doesn't seem to be always kind. And so what is knowing and seeing oneness on the one hand and being kind on the other? But this thing that we've been talking about all month, love. Isn't that what love is? Isn't that, to me, the epitome of the experience of love? It is the recognition of oneness. And it is behaving, acting, thinking, being, as if that oneness were in fact true. Whether that is with another person, in a situation, with our planet, with all beings everywhere. That the ability to be and see oneness and the ability to be kind is the epitome of the flame of love that we've been seeking to fan within ourselves all month. So when we fan the flame of love, we want to embrace both the dark and the light in this human experience for what it has for us, not as opposites or complements, but actually as opportunities to love. When we find ourselves in darkness, or we are being what we would call dark ourselves, it is an opportunity to love, to connect, to experience oneness, to presence oneness. And when we find ourselves in light, perhaps in the harsh or unforgiving experience either as it is being beamed on us or we're beaming it on someone else. What is that but an opportunity to be kind? So we could ask ourselves this winter solstice, how do we love? How do we love? How do we love when we feel that darkness? And how do we love when the light is a little too bright? How do we do that? Yeah, I think that's the question, right? We talked about it in our Sunday morning class this morning. What is the practice? Not just the theory of it. Oh, it's nice. It's the longest day of the year. Oh, we're going to celebrate darkness. Oh, yes, blah, blah, blah. We do it every year. Same old, same old, same old. Right? But it's not enough to actually have an intellectual idea about it. We must actually engage in the practice of the things that we learn and talk about. So how do we practice connecting and being kind? Especially when we don't feel like it, right? It's easy to do. We have the lovely biblical teaching, oh, it's great to pray for those that we love, but can we pray for our enemies? Right? It's the same thing. The question is, are we practicing being these things when we don't feel like it? Because when we don't feel like it, we're in some other story. We're potentially living our lives backwards. We're turned away from the light. Or we're completely sucked into believing that the experience we're having is real. That it's somehow the truth, as opposed to simply on the continuum of the human experience. So, winter solstice calls from us for love in the dark. Love in the dark. So when I'm being dark, or I'm seeing darkness, and I'm feeling uncomfortable with it, I don't like it, how do I bring love into that situation? How do you? So the first question to ask ourselves is, how are we one? How do we think about whatever's going on from oneness? Personal relationship, stuff that's going on in the world, stuff that's going on at work, stuff that's going on in our families, in our money, in our health, in our whatever it is. Feels dark, feels heavy. Do you see, the practice is how do we reframe it, shift our focus so that we think about it from oneness. Oh wait, but I'm connected to this person. Oh wait, somehow underneath this, there is a oneness that's happening here. And if I stood in that place, how would what I see change? How would how I'm thinking about it, how I'm reacting to it, how I'm engaging with it change? And if we find ourselves experiencing darkness or being in the dark in some form or fashion, what might we do with our words? If we are called to connect, if darkness calls us, it's the opportunity to practice love, right? And in the darkness, the opportunity to practice love is the connection and the recognition of oneness. What if our words connected rather than separated? What if we practiced that at our dinner tables, in all those heated political conversations, in all those places where we want to point fingers and say, ain't it awful, and look what they're doing, or whatever it is that feels dark and separate? What if our words invited us into connection and reminded us of the underlying oneness? Then we could bring our values to what we speak without turning our backs, right? without living backwards. Without turning our backs on the connection and on the oneness, we could speak our values. But we could speak them in the context of that. Do you see what I'm saying? Right? Doesn't mean we have to pretend that we agree. Doesn't mean we have to pretend that we all think it's the same thing. But the underlying fundamental truth of connection undergirds and lifts us out of the reactionary fear of the dark. And now we can bring ourselves into it in a whole different way. And then, of course, to ask ourselves, what is the action? How do we act with an intent to connect? How do we act with the intent to connect? Do you see that's how we have the opportunity to love when it feels dark? And it might be the opportunity to connect with a person across the table, with someone on Facebook, with the planet, with the environment. Are we acting to connect? Or are we acting as if we're separate? Like what we do doesn't matter. Like it doesn't matter if we don't bring our recycled bags to the grocery store. It doesn't matter how much plastic we use. Well, we're just one person. It doesn't matter. Do you see? If we're acting to connect, if we're acting out of oneness, then all of that, despite the darkness, those are opportunities to love the planet, to love each other, to love the people around us. The same is true in the light. When we want to be love, bring love, have light be an opportunity for love. Somebody will probably tell me this afterwards. It's the great quote, before you say anything, ask yourself, is it truthful? Is it necessary? And is it kind? Right? I don't remember who the quote is, but I sure learned it years and years and years ago. I'm more or less better at it, some days than others. Is it truthful? Is it necessary? And is it kind? Or is it at least a kind way to say it? Is at least a kind way to be engaged? So again, we always have the same opportunities: thought, word, action. It's always the same, right? So those are the questions. How are we kind in thought? I remember Thich Nhat Hanh when I was there in France 5 years ago at his retreat center, and we had an opportunity to hear him. It was amazing. And one of the things he said was, kindness is the ability to think about someone with a soft heart. To think about someone with a soft heart. What does that mean? Without resistance, without anger, without being shut down, without being pushed away, all of that, a soft heart. Now, this does not mean an unprotected heart, right? We do shield ourselves. We don't need to take on negativity. We do get to be in charge of what comes in, but a soft heart also softens what goes out. And what goes out in our thoughts and in our consciousness and the way in which we think about, are we thinking from a place where we seek to be kind? Is it possible for us to be kind in the way in which we hold people or a situation or circumstance? And again, that goes right on into our words, to speak with gentleness when at all possible. That doesn't mean we can't have heated discussions, and it doesn't mean that we can't speak our truth very clearly and profoundly. But kindness keeps us from attacking the other person. Do you see? Right? That's where the line is. I can say what I believe and what I think and what I feel as powerfully and strongly and consistently as important to me. But the minute that I start saying that someone else is stupid or wrong or can't see or whatever that is, do you see, now I'm no longer kind. because now I'm denigrating or denying the personhood of that other person, and I have forgotten that actually we're connected. So let's not confuse kindness with people-pleasing. Let's not confuse kindness with mealy-mouthed, right? We don't want to be confused. Kindness does not mean all of those dysfunctional behaviors that we learned as children. So we want to be really clear. But kindness means there's no attack. There's no making someone else wrong. There's an ability to say, this is what I think and feel or believe. And so that softness keeps us from getting out of our lane, keeps us from pushing over into someone else's. And then, of course, action. In our actions, when the light is too bright or too harsh, can we engage with it with kindness, which may mean taking a breath, starting again, finding a different way of speaking or doing or being that really allows that connection to show back up again, so that there's an openness in the heart. And so do you see, by embracing both light and dark for the value that's there as opportunities for love, well, that's really becomes the miracle, it seems to me. Gary Zukav says this: the winter solstice has always been a special time to me, as a barren darkness that gives birth to a verdant future beyond imagination. A time when withdrawal that produces something joyfully, a time of withdrawal that produces something joyfully inconceivable, like a monarch butterfly masterfully extracting itself from the confines of its cocoon, bursting forth into unexpected glory. Do you see, both the light and the dark invite a bursting forth of our love, invite different opportunities for us to be that love to the best of our ability. I love this, what Ralph Waldo Emerson says. You know, I looked for a lot of quotes, and let me just tell you that 99.9% of the quotes out there about light and dark all talk about the light overcoming the darkness, and the darkness, you know, is not good. And again, all those other things I said at the beginning. Well, the darkness is a place where we learn from our pain. And I love this from Ralph Waldo Emerson. This is what I think is really the truth. He says, when it is dark enough, you can see the stars. The darkness has value in and of itself as an opportunity for love, as an opportunity to express and to experience. So I want to close this morning with this poem by Walt Whitman. And as you know, Walt Whitman gave voice to the American philosophical and poetic sensibility in the 1800s. Walt Whitman, in his book Leaves of Grass. Miracles. Why? Who makes much of a miracle? As to me, I know of nothing else but miracles. Whether I walk the streets of Manhattan or dart my sight over the roofs of houses towards the sky, or wade with naked feet along the beach just in the edge of the water, or stand under the trees in the woods, or talk by day with anyone I love, or sleep in the bed at night with someone I love, or sit at table at dinner with my mother, or look at strangers opposite me riding in the car, or watch honeybees busy around the hive of a sunny afternoon, or animals feeding in the fields, or birds, or the wonderfulness of insects in the air, or the wonderfulness of the sundown, or of stars shining so quiet and bright, or the exquisite, delicate, thin curve of the new moon, or whether I go among those I like best and that like me best, mechanics or boatmen, farmers, or among the savants or to the opera. Whether I stand a long while looking at the movements of machinery, or behold children at their sports, or the admirable sight of the perfect old man, or the perfect old woman, or the sick in hospitals, or the dead carried to burial, or my own eyes and figure in the looking glass. These with the rest, one and all, are to me miracles, the whole referring, yet each distant and in its place. To me, every hour of light and dark is a miracle. Every cubic inch of space is a miracle. Every square yard of the surface of the earth is spread with the same. Every foot of the interior swarms with the same. Every spear of grass, the frames, limbs, organs of men and women, and all that concerns us, all these to me are unspeakably perfect miracles. Let us pray. So I invite you to go within with me right now, into the quiet, into the dark of our own inner sanctuary. It is here in this dark and quiet place, in the stillness, that we invite the light, that we embrace the infinite power and presence that is moving in, through, and as each and every one of us in our lives, in life itself. And so we can take the whole of our life, the light and the dark, the good and the bad, the up and the down, that which is open and closed, that which is fulfilled and which is not. And we can wrap all of it in our consciousness as the miracle of life itself, as each one of us learning and growing and becoming more of who we came here to be. And sometimes the light invites us to grow, and sometimes the darkness gives us quiet in which to rest. And so this morning, as we celebrate Winter Solstice this whole weekend, we embrace it all. And we affirm and declare that each moment is simply a greater opportunity for love, for us to fan the flame of love through connection, through kindness, through living and being the spiritual truth, moving in this miraculous world, in this beautiful life, in this glorious experience. So today we just simply bless it for all that it is and all that it is not. We rest in the calm knowing that truly life is a miracle. We are a miracle right here, right now. We let that be the star that guides us in the darkness and the shade that comforts us in the light. So as we breathe that in this morning, we release these words now, knowing that they are simply truth made manifest. They carry us as we move into our days. So we bless it, we call it good, and we say together, and so it is.